Hello. Hello and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today is going to be very much a talk on experiential knowledge as it relates to today's topic. And that topic is stuff and being stuffed and overstuffed on the path. And the related actions that we can and indeed should, and in some cases must undertake if we hope to make progress. The background, as you can see, is suitably matched to today's topic, which emerged out of direct experience, not only of myself, but others close to me. And the interaction between ourselves and that which we have accumulated. In some cases, we may be hoarding that which we have accumulated in this lifetime. In some cases, several lifetimes. I, in a way, have dealt with that on the physical plane, being that my parents, my biological parents, are now both deceased. Most recently, my father, back in August. And I have been charged with the liquidation of not only his accumulated material possessions and those of my late mother, who passed away 6 years ago, but in some cases, even the accumulated possessions of my grandfather and other, so possessions that had been passed down for even from prior generations. And in some ways, I've been dealing with the liquidation of possessions which, being antiques, were owned previously by other people, complete strangers, individuals that I've never met, nor am ever likely to meet, nor am likely to know to whom these particular possessions, these pieces belong to. And yet, here they are in my lap, on my shoulders, my responsibility to get rid of, to do something with. What is true for the material plane, and what is true for material goods and physical possessions is equally true for metaphysical possessions. And I use that word specifically here in the context of that old adage, the things you own end up owning you. And while we think that's a clever thing to say when it comes to material possessions, the things that we own, the things that we've bought, accumulated, etc., the things that have been given to us, gifted to us, as it were, and the objects which we have developed attachments to and are identified with, either immediately upon acquiring them or upon receiving them, or over time, in the case of nostalgia. Items which perhaps at the time we thought they were worthy enough to be set aside or squirreled away, stored somewhere, or just perhaps to sit rather anonymously on a shelf. And then years later, when we come to do a kind of inventory of our lives, we come across that item either in storage or tucked away quietly, unobtrusively, inconspicuously sitting on that shelf. And as we take stock of that particular item, it may bring back a flood of memories and emotions related to that particular talisman, or rather related to the time in our life which that particular item represents and embodies in some way for us. So it is not so much the item that we are truly identified with and attached to, but rather what the item represents. But the nature of the ego is to focus on the externalized representation, on the item itself, or if it's a little statuette, on the idol, so to speak. So we engage in our own sort of idolatry related to items and objects which have some form of nostalgic value to us, or they represent a period in our life or a time of our life, a circumstance in our life, which was formative or transformative or blissful or even heartbreaking. We can also have strong feelings towards such items that are connected to aspects of our personality or things that give us joy. So an example of that might be a movie poster or musical albums and album covers, or perhaps signed, autographed concert posters or albums, or whatever the case may be, some form of memorabilia or collectible. Perhaps if we're fans of Star Wars or some other property of this kind, perhaps we collected toys or other items related to that property. And because the property gives us joy, great pleasure, then the memorabilia which we have collected and accumulated representing and surrounding that particular property likewise triggers those feelings of joy and happiness and pleasure related to the property they represent. But invariably, sooner or later, now that's, that's, if we can call it that, that's sort of higher level accumulation of items, items that are special. Then, of course, there are probably items in your life, entire categories of items or boxes of objects, shelves filled with objects which just accumulated. If you do an inventory of them, you cannot readily recognize or identify anything specific to them that matter. Like, it's not like there are probably boxes of stuff in your life, in your place, in your basement, in your attic, in a storage unit, in a storage locker, wherever the case may be, perhaps in the garage or a barn, a shed, wherever you keep extra stuff, the stuff that you don't use every day, perhaps stuff that you haven't used in years, but you can't bring yourself to throw it away. Perhaps it was because you paid a lot of money for it, or perhaps because it was given to you by someone once as a gift and you just can't, or you couldn't at that time bring yourself to give it away, donate it, throw it out, etc., or even sell it if it had any value, if it has any remaining value in it. So you just squirreled it away. You put it aside, you put it away because you couldn't, for whatever reason, bring yourself to throw it out, or it didn't occur to you to throw it out. And over time, things like this just accumulate. Now, I suppose there's another category of stuff which started out very useful, and perhaps you used it on a regular basis for a time, but then it went out of style, or you got bored of it, or it began to become a little bit too worn, or you grew out of it, or whatever the case may be. But again, it wasn't so worn out that you said it was needed to be thrown out, but it was worn enough that you didn't want to continue using it on a regular basis. Now, items that fall into this category are often related to fashion, or perhaps linens, towels, fabric items generally, right? Because fabric is what tends to lose its vibrancy and vitality over time, over many washes, for example. And certainly fashion, depending on the type of fashion, can go out of style. It's no longer fashionable. But certainly if you're talking about men's fashions, or at least women's fashions as well, evening wear, gowns, dresses, or men's suits, these are not inexpensive items. They're expensive items, and they have like intrinsic value. I have a leather jacket, or at least I did, which was at one time over $1,000. It was very high quality leather, and and a leather, it used to be an animal. It used to be alive, for heaven's sake. And really, no one wears leather jackets anymore. It's certainly not out of style. It's certainly gone out of style, and it's not not only not fashionable to do so, it's almost like it's looked down upon. It's frowned upon in many ways because it's an animal skin, right? It's the same way that like women don't really wear furs anymore. It's like culturally become a taboo. But if you have a fur coat, like a genuine uh high quality fur coat in your closet, you're not going to be so quick to just throw that away, because my father worked in the needle trade and he was a designer for a luxury fur and leather company. He designed and they they made fur coats for women, and these things were upwards of 10, 15, $20,000 back in the 80s. Sable coats and such like. So these are things that you don't just throw away, because it's, again, you're dealing with a handmade artifact that has an intrinsic value of design and craftsmanship, and indeed the life of animals, right, lingering in it. It's just something of value. It's not so easy to throw away things of value. But again, that's another category or a class of stuff which you can say to yourself, that, who knows, fur might come back into fashion one day, or the double-breasted, jackets that I have, like suit jackets in suits that are like several $1,000s. Double-breasted suits might come back, or pleated slacks might come back into style one day. Who knows? So you don't necessarily want to throw them away, especially if they still fit you. They don't take up much space. There's all sorts of reasons why we won't get rid of stuff. And then there's, again, that accumulated stuff that you never really plan to put away. You're not collecting it by any stretch of the imagination. It's just there somehow, and stuff accumulates. Do you have Rubbermaid boxes or some other storage boxes filled with old photographs? I mean, it's one thing to have photographs in an album and neatly, stored on a bookshelf. You have albums maybe of your children or of your own childhood, your early childhood, your middle childhood, like elementary school, then maybe your high school, including your yearbooks, and then maybe your university years, and then your adult life, and then maybe albums beginning with your own children, and so on and so forth. And those albums will contain the best photos, the photos that you chose out of the pile. And the reason I'm saying this is because back in the day, before digital photography, we had to go and we shot a roll of film, and then we'd have to go and get that roll of film developed, and we would get 24 or 36 prints, and out of those 24 or 36 prints, you know uh maybe 5, maybe 10, well, maybe all 24 were great. But when you had to pick and choose, you cherry picked, in other words, the best prints to put away in an album, because photo albums were, again, expensive, and you were dealing with limited space. You didn't put all of the photos into your photo albums, because if you took a lot of photos, like my family did, you would have had like shelves and shelves and shelves filled with photo albums, and that was expensive. So what did you do? You cherry picked the handful of really good photos, maybe the second grade photos, the ones that were not so great, but they were still pretty good. Then you shoved those in envelopes and you mailed them to relatives, or grandma and grandpa, so they could get pictures of the family and of the grandkids and this type of thing. But then you had the C class and D class photos, the ones that were, they were okay, but they're not really so great to send to grandma and grandpa, and they're certainly not good enough to put in a photo album. But you paid money for those photos. right? You paid money for the film, you paid money for the development of that film, and here in your hands are, well, you just can't. And then there are photos of you, your children, and so on, or you and your parents, your family, and you're like, you can't bring yourself to throw those away. So what do? You put them back in the little envelope or package that you got from the uh, photo developing company, and you put them in a box. And over after years and years and years, that box of leftover photos just filled up and filled up and filled up. And there's probably other things in your life like that, where it wasn't quite good enough to be displayed on a shelf, to be prominent in your life, but you couldn't quite bring yourself to throw it away either. So it went into some storage somewhere, and things like that just accumulate and accumulate. It seems to multiply almost as if these physical phenomena were somehow sentient and could multiply, like like mold or fungus or anything else for that. But it just naturally accumulates. Paper is like this. Do you have boxes of old income tax returns in like thick envelopes or these file folder envelopes, complete with all of the receipts from that year? Why? Because here in Canada, at least, we have to keep 7 years of our income tax filings. We have to have them on hand because if we're audited, we can be audited as far back as 7 fiscal years. So at the very least, and I think it's probably similar in the United States. So at the very least, you probably have this stuff accumulated for 7 years worth of income tax filings, and with receipts and invoices and everything organized by month and so on, or however you do them. But if you're a little bit paranoid or just can't bring yourself to throw things away, or you forget about them, maybe you put them into filing boxes and shove them in the basement and forget about them. Maybe, like some people, you don't have 7 years, maybe you have 17 years or 27 years of financial statements and income tax returns and receipts going back decades. How about warranties and manuals and receipts for things that you bought back in the 80s, or the boxes for those things? Because what if you ever have to return it? Ooh, manufacturers are, everything must be returned. It's original packaging and you must have the original receipt. So there are all sorts of reasons why we might hold on to various different things, all kinds of stuff that we hold on to. And it's not until we have to face it. It's not until we have to move, or until we have some kind of disruption in our life that forces us to confront our stuff, the amassed, accumulated inventory in our life, that we begin to realize what we are storing or hoarding and indeed carrying with us. Because the Hermetic principle of correspondence applies here. As within, so without. Or rather, as without, so within. Our living space, our home, is a mirror. It's an extension of who we are. It is a representation and a projection of our inner psychology. And our inability to get rid of things, our refusal to give stuff away or to sell it or clean it out or throw it away, donate it, whatever it takes to get rid of it and get it out of our lives, our inability to do so, our refusal to do so, can say a great deal about our mentality, our psychology, and that which we may be holding on to inside. Even, whether they're good memories or bad memories. Good or like, these are subjective terms, good and bad. But the fact that we're holding on to aspects of our past or connections to the person that we were in the past. What might that say about ourselves here and now in the present? And what might that be? How might that be hindering us in our attempts to make progress into the future? Certainly, in terms of psychology, it is no secret, it's no mystery. We're very often told to let things go. Let go of past hurt, pain, trauma, bad memories, how these things don't serve us, so to speak. And it's peculiar in a way how or why we might choose to hold on to such memories, such so-called traumas. And if you've ever given this uh, subject its fair due in contemplation and meditation, it is very difficult to do so in the abstract. Because in the abstract, you will be thinking about, why does somebody hold on to their trauma, their pain? Why don't they let it go? And the answer, of course, is because they're not holding on to it. It's a psychological aggregate. It is an ego within them that is holding on to it. It is an ego which is identified with it. It's possibly even an ego which was created by it, came into being, entered into the person through that particular event, circumstance. So the ego's identification, the ego's very existence is dependent upon that particular memory. The ego uses that memory to hypnotize our consciousness with it, memories of it, the pain associated with it. And more importantly, the ego uses it to siphon from us our energy, which the ego needs to function. So why is it so hard to let go psychologically? Well, the answer is because you can't let go. You can't. You can only let go of that which you are holding on to. But if it's not you who's holding on to it, It's an ego that is holding on to it. And through that holding on, that ego is holding on to you. You see, our physical possessions that our I, at any given moment, is unable to let go of are precisely because egos are, and psychological events and circumstances and memories and pain, etc., that we are unable to let go of, are being held by egos, which possess us. We are the ones that are being held. If we comprehend and understand the functional mechanics of psychological aggregates, the closest thing we have in nature and biology that we can associate with the same type of behavior are parasites. The parasitic symbiote, right? The symbiotic relationship, which is asymmetrical. It is not mutually advantageous in the strictest sense. It is, from this perspective of the Alm of Life and of revolutionary psychology, but for most people, it is a asymmetric symbiotic relationship. That means it's parasitic. And like a parasite that infests its host, it keeps its host alive, but it's siphoning off the energy from that host. But the host cannot let go of its parasite. Just try letting go of a tick. Could you imagine if you went to a doctor and you had a tick burrowed under your skin, and you went to the doctor saying, "Will you help me with this parasite?" And the doctor said, "You just let it go." That would be absurd. And yet that's exactly what psychologists and psychiatrists tell you to do, and counselors tell you to do. And people all the time tell us to do. Well, just let it go. You have to let it go. But how can you let go of something when it doesn't want to let go of you? The pain, the suffering, the trauma, whatever it is that you're dealing with that's causing you hardship. How can you let it go when it's actually, you don't actually have, you're not the one holding on to it. It's a psychological aggregate. It's an aspect most likely in your subconscious mind that is holding on to it. So how do you let it go? And do you really want to just let it go? Again, from the perspective of the Alm of Life, from the perspective of revolutionary psychology, every ego, every psychological aggregate has something to teach us. So if any particular psychological aggregate is holding on to something, we don't want to just let it go, because that something is a marker, is a clue is a sign that can lead us to the psychological aggregate behind it. So some traumatic event, some painful circumstance, or even some nostalgic circumstance. Perhaps we had a relationship, or someone broke up with us a long time ago, but they were the love of our life, or we thought they were the love of our life. And we've been unable to move on with our life because our memories and our nostalgia and always return to this individual who we lost. It's an individual we could have lost because of a breakup. It's an individual we could have lost because of illness, because of death. But our identification and attachment to that individual holds us back and prevents us from going on with our lives. But there is something within us that is creating that attachment, that is preventing us from moving on, that is making us continue to live in the past and relive whatever it is that it's holding on to. And it's that making us relive over and over and over again how it captures our consciousness and feeds off of our energy, because it forces us to give our attention. And you know that new age adage, energy flows where attention goes. So we don't want to just let go of that attachment to the past, because if we somehow were able to forget about, and what most people think they're letting go of is they're actually suppressing or repressing a memory. And if you actually could let it go and sever the connection between that ego and whatever it was in the past, that ego will still be present. And that ego will be searching for a new opportunity to either repeat the same circumstance from the past and renew its ability to possess you, or a similar circumstance, or perhaps a completely different circumstance, but a suitably traumatic one, or suitably nostalgic one, or suitably romantic one, that it can wrap you up in, and once again replay its program, its algorithm. And this is why many people who hoard stuff, physical stuff now, they can't stop. And that it's not enough just to clean out the garage or get rid of, the stuff that they accumulated to date. Or they move and they, give everything away to charity, or whatever drastic measure, they get all this stuff out of their life. As soon as they get out of it, they start accumulating again. Because the algorithm of accumulation, the algorithm of not being able to throw stuff away, returns, because the psychological aggregates responsible for that do not leave just because you throw away the stuff that they accumulated and were attached to. You can think of it like harvesting a mushroom. You can pluck the mushroom caps and return weeks later or months later, and the caps will have regrown. Because 97% of what a mushroom is invisible to the naked eye. It's called the microcilium. I think I got that right. The microcilium, microphilia? No, microcilium. Mycelium. It's the mycelium. but it's invisible to the naked eye. That's 97% of what a mushroom is. The cap that we can see, it's just the fruit. It's essentially the sexual organs, the reproductive system of the mushroom. So in that sense, and again, that's when you think of reproduction, you think of growth and multiplication. That's how stuff, as we know, multiplies or seems to be able to multiply. So the stuff in our house, in our attic, in our basement, in our storage locker is like the cap of the mushroom. You can give it all away to charity. You can empty out the garage. You can empty out the storage shed. Excuse me. You can liquidate everything out of your basement. Give it all away. Sell it, whatever. You clean it all out. It doesn't matter. Give it enough time, it's all going to accumulate again. Now, it's going to be different stuff, or maybe it's going to be the same stuff or very similar stuff. Because if you don't, just like the mushroom, if you don't get at the mycelium, if you don't get at the root of all of that stuff, then getting rid of the stuff is just plucking the mushroom cap. I said at the outset that today is going to be experiential, and that this topic is so relevant right now because I've been dealing with the stuff of my parents and my grandparents. Even I went to a jeweler was doing like a traveling roadshow type thing, and I went and took a bunch of stuff to them. And my grandfather had accumulated quite the coin collection in a couple albums, and all of the coins were carefully stowed in little cardboard packets, envelopes with a cellophane window on them, so that you could open the album, and the albums had all these little pockets, right? They had pages, transparent pages with pockets, and then these pockets had these individually wrapped coins, so you could pull them out and observe them and look at them without touching them, because they were in these little cardboard cases and whatnot. I'm sure you've seen something similar when it comes to stamp collecting and coin collecting. And I had never really taken a close look at my grandfather's coin collection because wasn't all that interested. And so I never gave it a second thought, really, until I finally went to have it appraised. And it wasn't really worth anything, because it turned out that my grandfather, being Hungarian, and what he valued, why he collected those coins, he valued them as keepsakes, as souvenirs from his travels, and as tokens of appreciation and understanding for the nations that he had visited and had direct experiential knowledge of. So again, they were valuable to him, and he treated them as though they were collectible. He put them all away and organized them and stowed them as though they were priceless. Because to him, his memories were priceless. And these objects, these tokens, these talismans of those memories, he wanted to keep them and preserve them. And so he did so. But what he found valuable had no relevance whatsoever to what coin collectors would find valuable. There was nothing, there was very, very, very little, precious little in his collection that had any kind of collectible value. Even some of the Roman coins, which were in his collection, genuine coins from the Roman Empire, they were Roman coins which he basically found in his youth on the ground in his travels, just here and there and everywhere. He would, if he came across a Roman coin, it went into his collection. Again, because it was valuable to him. He found it. But they were in terrible shape. And if you know anything about the collectibles market, you know that whether it's coins or stamps or like many other objects, they have to be graded by a grading agency for their condition. And based on their grade and their collectability is what determines their market value. Again, as a collector's piece. So even his Roman coins weren't really worth anything. And I mention this because of the care and attention that he put. And I remember going to visit him in Hungary, and he would often pull out his coin album and his stamp album, because he also collected stamps. And he would basically leaf through his coin collection and his stamp collection, showing me, look at this stamp and look at that stamp and look at this coin, look at that coin. See how beautiful it is? See how intricate it is? Look at this design. Look at that design. Oh, this is from this year when the Olympics were in this country, or that year when such and such political turmoil happened, or this was the year of this revolution, or this is the year of that war, and on and on and on it went. And he had all of these coins from these years from different places. And he had a story to tell with many of them. Oh, and I was here and I was there and I was living in this country when I got this coin, and this is what I was doing and this is where I was working, and so on and so forth, right? So everything had a story, everything had meaning and purpose and value to him on that basis. So for him, his coin collection was a diary. It was a map to his past. It was a way for him to be able to tokenize his memories and his nostalgia for his travels, for his youth, and all of his experiences. Each and every coin was a token representing an aspect of who he was. And of course, by the time I met him, he was an older gentleman. He was a grandfather. And, Hungary was still a communist country, still a part of the the other side of the Iron Curtain, part of the Soviet Union, or at least the Eastern Bloc countries, rather. And so his life and his prospects in the present and moving forward were less shiny, less colored, less exciting, less adventurous than the life that he had lived. And so, like many grandfathers, like many people of advanced years, all he had and what he wanted to share was his experience. And that was what these objects represented. These tokens were, as I said, a diary, a biography, an autobiography in coinage. If you have ever cleaned out your attic or your basement or wherever you keep objects from your past, or if you ever flip through old photo albums, or if you have stacks of old love letters from a certain relationship or certain time of your life, or greeting cards, Christmas cards and birthday cards and Valentine's Day cards, etc., along with letters and notes, and perhaps you have them somewhere stacked and tied up with a ribbon and a bow. Maybe you don't pull them out anytime a guest arrives to show them off. But if you've ever spent some time reorganizing or moving, it's especially when we're moving that we realize how much stuff we have, accumulated stuff. And then you take some of these objects and you look at them for the first time in years, perhaps decades, and you can be amazed at the emotions, the flood of memories that return to you as you go through those photos, or as you know, even as you hold those items, the energy that they contain because of your identification and attachment, not necessarily to the physical item, but to what the physical item represents as a doorway, as a gateway. It's a key to opening up aspects of who we were. I don't say who we are, but for certain who we were. And formative circumstances in our life which brought us to where we are and who we are right now. So I'd had this experience with the jeweler and dealing with, right, there was coins, there was also some broken jewelry, but then there was also my father's pocket watches, because he liked to repair broken pocket watches. And it turned out none of them were gold. They were all just gold plated. So really very little of what I took to the jeweler for appraisal had any meaningful value. It was just, but they were valuable to my father. They were valuable to my grandfather, as I said. They had an assigned value given to them by the individuals who had held on to them and collected them. And I also had to post on Facebook Marketplace some antiques, an antique dining room set, an antique living room set, and an antique bedroom set. And as I did so, I kind of sigh and dropped my head as I was looking through for prices, wondering, well, how should I price these things? And I was looking at, I was just confronted with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of listings for antique dining room sets, living room sets, and bedroom sets. My parents used to go antiquing at times, at least a couple Sundays every month, especially in the summertime. They would go antiquing, and they spent so much money on the stuff, and they were buying it because of the craftsmanship, the age, the quality, the durability, to them, the beauty, right? Like anyone who appreciates antiques, they have an appreciation for, they don't make it like they used to, right? And they were so convinced that this is not a purchase. This is not consumerism. This is an investment, right? You buy furniture at a store or whatever, it's just going to go downhill. Like you buy something at IKEA, it's just going to it's never going to go up in value. It's just going to degrade and deteriorate, especially IKEA stuff because it's made out of paper basically. But antiques, hand carved, solid wood, maple, walnut, cherry, these are like, this is proper furniture, handmade, handcrafted, solid pieces of fully functional furniture. I mean, we have a dining room set. It's like, it's got to be like 150 years old. They sure as hell don't make them like that anymore. And so they were convinced that these things will only go up in value because they will only get older. And as they get older, and they will only become more rare, their rarity, their age, but their quality, the craftsmanship, they will become more rare and rarefied. And in contrast to everything else, they will be seen as more beautiful and more desirable than ever before. And that, of course, hasn't come to pass. Right? Contemporary design and contemporary aesthetics places next to no value on antiques. Sure, there are still people who like antiques and like to collect antiques or own antiques and so on and so forth. But the vast majority of people, and certainly the vast majority of young people, they have absolutely zero interest and place no value whatsoever on things that are old and things that are, because they're handmade or handcrafted or whatever the case may be. So now the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or is it just that good and bad don't apply here because they're just subjective terms? The reality from where I am is that I have a house full of antiques and nobody wants them. And if I try to sell them, I'm in a marketplace that is jam-packed with antiques because everybody is trying to sell them. Everybody's trying to get rid of them. There's no shortage of antiques for sale right now. Well, maybe always, but certainly right now. It's not like you have to go antiquing anymore. You can open up Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji or whatever, and it brings the antiquing to you. You can go antiquing from the comfort of your own home or your smartphone or whatever. So the imagined value, the ascribed value of an object is wholly subjective. There is no intrinsic objective value to an object. We might argue over the value of, let's say, gold or silver. But again, it's not the object itself that's valuable in those cases. If you're talking about broken jewelry or whatever, right? It's the gold that's valuable. It's not that it's in the shape of a ring. It might be valuable in the shape of a ring if it's something extraordinary, or if it's something made by a certain artist or a certain design house or a certain jewelry company, or if it's in the shape of a watch and it has a brand like Patek Philippe or Omega or something, or maybe Rolex, then maybe it has the value because those are collectible. But even that is a subjective value. Like the value of a Rolex is subjective. It's not objective. It's subjective. It's a bunch of people have agreed that name, that brand name, has value. Now, there are reasons why they have agreed that it has value: craftsmanship, workmanship, rarity, the use of materials, and the age of that particular company, and for how long they've been making wristwatches and pocket watches and so on and so forth. So there's a provenance that, and you could argue there are objective aspects like the engineering that goes into the object. But the monetary value, the price that is ascribed to that object, even if it is consensus based, is still subjective. An Omega watch or a Rolex watch has no inherent intrinsic value other than it tells time. Well, guess what? A $5 Casio digital watch, a plastic Casio digital watch, tells time. Or a Timex watch, or a watch made in China, tells time. And you can buy a Rolex knockoff watch from China for $30. And it even looks the same as a real Rolex. Now, it won't be the same on closer inspection. Then if you took it apart, it will have no resemblance to what a real Rolex looks like or how a real Rolex works. But both tell time. That is what they do. That is its function. Its inherent intrinsic value as an object. They're the same. And because we're talking about time, unless you're working with 1/1000th of a second, and you're measuring, God only knows what, in terms of accuracy, there'll be no functional difference between the two. Maybe over 10 years, the cheap knockoff Rolex will be, a minute or two faster or slower than the Rolex. Maybe the Rolex or the Omega chronometer is going to be so pinpoint accurate with its jewel movements and Swiss design and engineering and watchmaking, maybe it's going to have this incredible accuracy over 10 years, that it's not going to gain or lose minutes, but maybe only seconds. But because we all live with daylight savings time, or at least most of us do, right? We have to freaking adjust our watch an hour every twice a year, forward and back. We have to set the time forward and back. Or when we travel, we have to set our watch to match the local time. So that competitive advantage doesn't exist. Practically speaking, it doesn't exist, because every time you set your watch, you're not setting it to the exactness of it, the exactness to 1/1000th of a second or whatever. So the point is that functionally there's no intrinsic value there, other than it tells time. And even that, by the way, is subjective. Why do we need to be able to tell time? Why is that important? It's important in our modern life to be able to, down to the minute, but for a long time, people got around without wearing watches, and they told that they wanted to know what time it was. They looked outside. They looked at the sun. If it was cloudy, okay, so, their sundial didn't work that day. Couldn't tell, so they had to guess. But life was different. Life was slower paced. We didn't have the need for, to be able to tell the time, like down to 15-minute increments to make it to our appointment or whatever. Or because the trains are running, like in Japan, you can set your watch by the trains, because that's how on time the trains are all the time. So as a result, my father had watches that he believed were valuable, but nobody else believed they were valuable. The jeweler took them for parts, but not because the watches were valuable. The point here is that the stuff that we accumulate, the more value we ascribe to them, the more we may be burdening ourselves with an illusion, a myth, a fantasy, a construct of our own making, to be sure, but a construct nonetheless. Something that we are convinced is valuable. Like my grandfather was convinced his coin collection was valuable and his stamp collection was valuable because he liked the coins, because they reminded him of something. Or my father's pocket watches or the wristwatches that he collected, because he liked them, because they were, or he thought they were valuable. But he never bothered to check or look into or maybe care what the consensus was. And here's where we might run into an interesting side note, that in some ways, they were right not to care what the consensus was. Like there's a duality here. It's not quite as simple as subjective value, and like I said, like most things don't have an objective value other than their functionality, which means they're complete. In other words, like a commodity. So what's the value of an egg, right? All eggs are the same value. Okay, let's not have an argument over free range and organic and all the rest of it. It's an egg. or small, medium, and large. Okay, fine. All large eggs, more or less, have the same intrinsic value. It's an egg. That's why we call them commodities, because you can replace that egg with any other egg and it'll have the same value. We trade eggs on the commodities market like most produce, and there's a set price, a market value for eggs, for a dozen large eggs. And so eggs are interchangeable in that sense. It's a commodity based on the intrinsic value and, of course, the economics of supply and demand, et cetera, et cetera. But an egg has the capacity to give life. It has the capacity to sustain life. And it even has the capacity, literally as an egg, to hatch new life, a baby chicken. I mean, which, if that baby chicken happens to be a hen and grows up to be a hen and you have access to a rooster, well, then that one egg, given enough time in the correct circumstances, could actually be the beginning of many more eggs. Could actually be the start of an entire chicken farm, an entire egg production line. Again, given enough time and the right circumstances. So there is this intrinsic value to an egg, and indeed every egg, regardless. There's consensus around that value, to be sure. But even if you remove all the economics and all the value, if you take all the numbers away and the markets and the commerce and everything else, even the Bushmen on the Kalahari or any other Aboriginal peoples, right? Even a snake or any mammal on the planet, any lizard, any predator of any kind knows the intrinsic value of eggs. Birds know the intrinsic value of eggs. And whether that value is measured on its capacity to give life as a source of sustenance, as a source of food, or its intrinsic value is considered as its capacity to hatch offspring, the continuation of one's own species, to hatch one's own offspring, one's children, one's bringing into the world. If one is a lizard or a bird or other egg-laying animal. The eggs of your kind have a different intrinsic value than the eggs of a different species that you might consume. But the intrinsic value of an egg is always related to life in some way. It's a life-giving thing. But eggs are also a perishable good. So it's not something that you can store for very long. You can store eggs for a long time, actually, but comparatively speaking to other food. But it's not something you store for years and years and years. You don't hoard eggs in that sense. But you see the difference between something having like the intrinsic value of something versus the ascribed value that we give to something. And that the more value we ascribe to an object, the more we become identified and attached to it because of the value that we have given it, or that it has been given to it on our behalf by an ego, nostalgia, um, or some attachment, some identification, whatever the case may be, something from our past. And so we hold on to it. And as I explained earlier, what it's really happening is it's holding on to us. That ego that has ascribed value to that object is holding on to us, and that's why we're holding on to it. In the law of correspondence, it's like a chain of command. The ego externalizes our identification and attachment to the object, so we don't pay attention to the fact that by making us want to continue to possess that object, that ego continues to possess us. And herein lies the metaphysical science behind the expression, the things you own end up owning you. Because long after you've stopped using them, and you've stored them away, but then years later, decades later, you still can't bring yourself to get rid of it. Well, that just means that the ego that made you put it away in the first place, that made you acquire it, accumulate it, and form an attachment to it in the first place, that ego is still alive and well inside of you and has probably accumulated many more things since. Azazel says, "Hello, how are you?" I'm fine, Azazel. How are you? As you can see, I'm surrounded by junk. I'm surrounded by stuff, and that's what we're talking about today because I've been talking about the very personal experiences I've been having dealing with stuff, um, inherited stuff, and indeed my own stuff. If I keep saying that word, it's going to start to lose all meaning. But if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to look up George Carlin's stand-up routine about stuff. It's on YouTube. I won't play it because, we always get problems with copyright. But if you want to see and hear one of George Carlin's most famous stand-up routines, just go to YouTube and search George Carlin stuff. You won't be disappointed. Azazel says, it's better than it used to be. So I'm grateful for that. Anxiety had us paralyzed for months. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad to hear that you're feeling better. So indeed, it's good to be grateful when we have a reprieve from our ongoing chronic issues. So then, this morning, last night we had our first night below 0 degrees. So it was freezing for the first time. 0 degrees Celsius, that is, here in Canada, here where I live anyway. And so I woke up this morning and I said, well, I better turn off the water to the outside. Better shut off the water inside the house to the outside taps, because I don't want those pipes to freeze in the wintertime. And the fall is the time to shut off the water and open up the outside tap and so on, do what must be done. So, I went to do that and I shut off the tap. Then I went outside to open up the tap and let the water run out so the pipe is empty. And the water kept running. I'm like, that's strange. I just shut the water supply off on the inside. And I was like, but the water is still running outside. I'm like, that's very strange. Is it possible that I turned the dial the wrong way? I'm like, well, I don't know, it's Sunday morning, maybe I'm groggy, maybe I wasn't paying attention, who knows? I went back inside the house, I went back downstairs into the basement and went to the tap, and I checked it, and it was turned all the way to the right. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. So I was like, yeah, I said, well, I don't know, but just I got to find out what's going on. So at least if I'll turn it and I'll try to open it again. If I hear water rushing, then I know maybe I just didn't give it enough time for it to run out or whatever. So I turn it left. I start turning it to the left to open it up, and I don't hear any water moving. And as I'm opening up the tap, all of a sudden the entire tap comes off. Yeah, the tap came off in my hand. It turns out it was not a proper valve that was installed there. There was a hole, and this was screwed into it. So when I tightened it, for, like when I closed it, it was tight, and then when I opened it the other way, instead of opening, the whole thing turned, and this was just loosely threaded on there to begin with, and it came off. Like, this was all in the ceiling, right? Because I'm in the basement, and this is where the water supply runs along the ceiling, and it came off in my hand. So now water is pouring out and showering down on me. Suffice it to say, I ran as soon as I could over, and I shut off the mains. But after a few moments of panic, and like, trying to, when there's water gushing out at you in your face, you're like, your natural instinct is like to me, like, to try to plug the hole and try to stop the water, right? Which is stupid because you can't actually stop water that way because it's under pressure. But when I finally said, okay, this is nuts, and I went and shut off the main, so I stopped the water. Now, luckily, where this tap was, and there was some large wooden IKEA shelves with a bunch of linens on them. So luckily, the linens ended up absorbing most of the water, and the wooden IKEA shelves absorbed a lot of water because they were just the cheap pine IKEA shelving units. Like, so they were not finished in any way. So the bare wood, the bare softwood, was able to absorb a lot of water as well. So that minimized the flooding catastrophe that might have happened. But it was this, but again, it was another um, sort of life lesson about owning things. And I now have like linens in the dryer, and I have linens hanging up everywhere I can possibly find a place to hang up something, linen to dry out. I've got that entire shelf was filled with linens and towels and pillows and all this stuff, and they're all completely, like, they're soaked, right? So I'm like drying them out, and I've got the dehumidifier running, and it's just and it just serendipitously happened this morning, just a few hours before I was meant to do this live stream. And it was just another little experiential life lesson for me, kind of putting a punctuation point on why it's so important to sell this house and and free myself from all of this stuff. By the way, this photo is not actually my house or my basement. I pulled this from the internet. The the, the background. This is not what my basement looks like. This is You guys know, so I don't want you to leave you with that impression, but uh, still, we all have our stuff, and again, it's only when we face the reality of how much stuff we have, when we have to move, when we have to get rid of it, or when we face a circumstance like this morning, which was in a very, very small way. Okay, I don't want to blow it out of proportion. It wasn't that big a deal. I did have to call a plumber, of course, and I paid through the nose because I had to pay overtime because it's Sunday morning. But still, he came and he put in a proper ball valve, a proper shutoff valve now, instead of this rinky-dink stupid thing, which is certainly not regulation by any regulation I would ever allow to exist. And but regardless, it was a flood. Again, not a real flood. It was just indicative of, it represented a flood. Like, if you've ever experienced a flood, a basement flooding, for example, and you have a bunch of stuff in that basement, that's when you become aware of just how much stuff you have. When you are facing a mountain of stuff that has now suffered water damage or prolonged water exposure. Like, you only realize how many linens you have when you have to find a place to try to hang them up to dry them. Every door in the house, every uh backrest of every chair, exercise equipment, any place that is relatively water resistant, and you can hang something that's now damp or saturated or soaking wet, and then while you're doing that, you're trying to throw things in the dryer and so on and so forth. That's when you realize how many linens you have, when they're all wet all at once suddenly, and you got to somehow try to figure out a way to dry them out. That's when you realize, okay, I have too many linens. I have too many bed sheets and pillows and towels and stuff that I never use. Right? So they need to be donated. They need to be gotten rid of. They need to be whatever, but they need to be gotten rid of, cleaned out, cleared out. Because if we can run with that metaphor for just a moment, right? What else flows into our life? And what else is there accumulated in our psychology, which, like linens, might absorb what is flowing into our life and become waterlogged? And because, let's work with some sort of pain or suffering or lingering trauma or unhealed psychological circumstance. We are carrying that in our psychology, in our heart, mind, or maybe even somewhere in our body, in our physical body, right? And it manifests as a like an arthritic pain or something, or some tick or twitch or right. Regardless, some experience that we are identified and attached to, and as I said, we can't let go of, because there's an ego that is holding on to it as it's holding on to us, and it won't let go of us, so we can't let go of it. And maybe that circumstance was something like betrayal. When we were betrayed by someone we loved, and we had trusted them, and we had been open to them. And then in the process of that, perhaps they gave something to us, which we received with open arms, and we trusted and we put our faith in. But that thing that we received ended up being only a source of harm and hardship and suffering. So they ended up betraying our trust. We gave them everything, and in return, they gave us some tarnished, worthless, invaluable facade in return. In other words, it was a betrayal, and it was an unfair exchange, and we were taken advantage of. And maybe that memory so scarred us, so it made us cynical, but we believed, or we were made to believe, that, aha, this is a life lesson, right? You can't trust anyone. You mustn't be so naive. You mustn't be so trusting. You can't put your faith in people just willy-nilly. And so we took that linen, right? And we stowed it away. We stored it somewhere in our psyche. And to this day, when something flows into our life, we greet it with cynicism, with possibly even hostility, but certainly we greet it with doubt, and we greet it with suspicion. It's like that linen of betrayal is there in our psyche, and it has the capacity to absorb what is trying to flow into our lives. People are trying to be kind to us. They're trying to give us advice. They're trying to make an overture to us, to get us to open up, to get us to form a reciprocal relationship of mutual harmony and symbiosis with them. But because we're carrying this linen from way back as an object of remembrance, as a talisman of betrayal, and we carry it like armor, like a banner of our wisdom, of our worldliness. We are not so naive, and we will not be taken advantage of. And we are no one's patsy, right? So we have this banner, this tapestry, this linen. And so when people are trying to be kind to us and show us goodness and being generous to us, this linen takes that and absorbs that and becomes damped and waterlogged and soaking wet. And we start to smell the reek of that linen, of that tapestry. And it reminds us, it brings back all those memories of betrayal and how terrible it feels to put our trust and faith in somebody who's promising us the world, but ends up giving us crap in return. And we end up on the short end of the stick. And there's the banner that's absorbing all of this goodness and it's exuding, and it's radiating, and it's giving off this stench, this foul stench of this memory that's decades old, and emblazoned on that tapestry in a Latin motto, right? You can't trust anybody, you can't trust all the people all the time, or whatever the case may be, or I shall not be naive, I will not be taken advantage of, I am nobody's patsy. When really, right, something is trying to flow into your life, And whether you identify with the linen, like I had to face this morning, these linens that this water was pouring in and was absorbing all this stuff. So now I've got all this waterlogged linen. I've got to air out. I've got to dry. I got to clear out all this stuff. And I realize now, come Monday, I'm calling the Diabetes Foundation or whoever I can, and I'm taking all these linens. I'm going to dry them out, fine, and then I'm going to put them in bags and I'm going to donate them. I'm going to get rid of them all, right? Because you become aware of what you have, right? When you have to deal with them in this kind of way. But whether you identify with linens or maybe it's paper and accumulations of paper, maybe it's books, maybe you have mountains of books somewhere in your basement, books you've read once and you will never read again. You will never even crack the spine on them again. And you certainly will never be able to give them away or give them to people who are going to read them, because young people don't read books anymore. I've got sets of encyclopedias. Who is going to use an Encyclopedia Britannica from 1968? Right? So, but that too will absorb water. Not only will absorb water, but paper will burn. If you have mountains of paper in your basement or your attic, it's basically like some people collect old newspapers, old Time magazines, old TV guides, right? Like if you have stacks and stacks of paper or your old income tax receipts, whatever, it's, if it's not water, it could be fire. It could be termites. It could be whatever. The same thing is true for our psychology. What we carry with us, the accumulated attachments and identifications, they can serve a purpose, but the purpose that they serve for us on the path must be to get to the root source of why we are accumulating this stuff. What is it about the accumulation of stuff? What can that teach us? What can it show us? What can it reveal to us? Because hoarding, right? This is not an uncommon phenomenon, by the way. I mean, you all know this. I just put into Google, right? Stuff, hoarding. And it's just endless photos of people's, closets and shelving units and garages. And some are more organized than others, right? What happens if I do that? Oh, okay, that's I guess I didn't want to do that. So I mean, this is an experiment that you can run yourself. Just go to Google and type in stuff and hoarding, and you go through these photos. And I mean, they've also, like, people have made TV shows about this, right? The Discovery Channel or whatever. Remember I talked about paper? These are these paper filing cabinets. Where I say open image in UTab. Okay, look at that. See, these are these paper file folders for storing like taxes and whatnot. And here's somebody who's got these are old postcards and what have you, travel documents and maps and things, travel guides. Again, just accumulated stuff from their trips. So hoarding is a real phenomenon. And we all do it to, one degree or another. But the point is, what does it have to say about us? What can we learn about ourselves by confronting our accumulation of stuff and understanding that the accumulation of stuff out there is a manifestation and expression of an accumulation of stuff in here? If we're unable to let things go and throw things out there, why? Or if it's difficult to do so, or we don't want to do it, that's an opportunity to meditate, go within, and identify the source of that inhibition, the source of that resistance. And therein lies a potential breakthrough, comprehension of ourself. By the way, Leah says, hugs, y'all. Hello, Leah. Nice to see you. I think you posted that 20 minutes ago, that comment, and it's been sitting there and I've been staring at it. But as I said, it's not enough just to throw things out, because you can throw it out all you want. If you don't get to the root cause of why you accumulated it in the first place, you're just going to start accumulating again. So what is it that we have to do? This brings me to someone I know who also this week I had a conversation with. And he is experiencing a situation, a condition, a medical condition, whereby he actually has a mass, an accumulated mass in his intestine. It's an undigested mass in his intestine. Now, I won't get into too many details, but this individual also has one of those self-storage units. And in that storage unit, he has stored like 50 some odd years of accumulated stuff. And he's paying to have it stored. And again, I don't want to get into too many details. It's just enough to know that this individual also is suffering tremendously because he feels cut off from his innermost. He feels cut off from his intuition and source of inspiration. And I try to express to him how life, his divine mother, is giving him these signs that are unmistakable. The Buddha said, you must empty your cup. You must empty your cup. Why? Because only an empty cup can be filled. If what we long for is inspiration and knowledge and intuition, if what we long for is for something to flow into our life, and more importantly, flow through us into the world, that Christic light, the waters of life, and the life-giving wine, the water into wine of the transubstantiation, the blood of Christ, the body and blood of Christ, the waters of life. They can flow through us into the world if we are a worthy vessel, capable of carrying that water, of holding that water, of being a vessel for that which flows. It flows into us, and then it can flow out of us. And I've used this analogy before, talking about a vessel that you take to the well. And through meditation and self-observation and self-remembering, we lower ourselves, we deepen, we go deep and deep and deep into our own earth, just like a well is dug and drilled deep into the earth, where there's a fountain, a pure source of water deep within us. And if we've emptied out our vessel and we've cleaned out our vessel, we can lower ourselves deep into that earth, that metaphysical earth of ours. And we can draw water from that eternal source deep within us. And we can pull it up to the surface, and via this vessel, including our mind, and including this personality, and including our physical body, we can use this vessel to bring that water forth into the world, and we can pour it into other people's cups, those who have an empty cup. And we can quench their thirst, and we can give them a taste drawn from the fountain of sweet ambrosia deep within all of us. But if our vessel is full of stuff, and if our vessel is full of absorbent stuff, even if we do go down deep into the well, or whatever flows into our life from without, and our vessel is full of absorbent stuff, it'll just soak it up and keep it for itself. Or if our vessel is just filled to the brim with whatever, we won't be able to fill it from the fountain. Nothing will be able to flow into our lives. And this individual's experience, his situation is so acute that it has produced a physical manifestation within his own body, where he has a mass within his intestines, an undigested mass that obstructs his ability to absorb nutrients from new things that he eats. And there is a parasite at work, at play, that is in part responsible for all of this. That parasite is a physical manifestation of the psychological aggregates that are playing out in his heart mind that prevent him from getting rid of the shit in his locker, in his storage unit, and that prevents his body from getting rid of the shit that's blocking up his large intestine. Because that's what it is. This undigested mass. It's just shit that hasn't been digested properly. It hasn't become shit yet because the body is holding on to it like it's stuff. But it's it was never meant to remain there. The stuff that you eat, it's not designed for all of it to stay with you. They say you are what you eat. Yeah, you are whatever percentage of what you eat, and the rest, you poop out the back. You extract what's valuable, what's usable, what's necessary. And you excrete what is not useful, what you do not need, what is excess, or what is downright harmful and toxic. And that which is undigestible, unusable, not valuable. And therein lies the key, the digestion part. Digestion is just a kind of processing. But digestion is active. Now, we are not conscious of our digestion most of the time. It's a mechanical process that the body takes care of, but the body does so actively. If we could understand even a fraction of what the body does in order to be able to process what we eat and extract from it energy and vitamins, minerals, in other words, nutrients, and all the different systems and subsystems that it uses to be able to make that happen, and then excrete out the byproducts and the leftovers, the remainders, we would be blown away. I mean, right down to the metabolism of different nutrients, different macronutrients, where proteins are processed and absorbed, and where carbohydrates and sugars are processed and absorbed, and then how everything gets filtered, and then through the kidneys, right, and the liver, and the different organs involved, beginning with the stomach and the stomach acid, but then going into the small intestine and going through the probiotics, right? The flora and the fauna of the symbiotic relationships we have with our gut flora and fauna, which are helping to break down and assisting with the digestive process, and on and on and on it goes. But this is an active process, even though it's mechanical. On that level of nature, it's mechanical, yes, but the body must do so intelligently, so it's consciously mechanical, if you can put it that way. In other words, the body must pay close attention, and indeed, digestion actually takes a lot of energy. And depending on what you eat, can take even more energy. Like protein, digesting protein has a greater cost. But the reason why the body's happy to do so is because protein is one of the most essential building blocks of the body, particularly for muscle. So digestion is necessary. We have to process what we eat, what we take in. We can't just store it away. the way it is. Because if we do that, we end up with an accumulated undigested mass in our large intestine. We end up with unprocessed, mounds and mounds and mounds of unprocessed memories and nostalgia and pain and of our past, of talismans and objects representing the person we used to be, the person perhaps that we think we are, or the person that we cannot let go of, the old self that we cannot let die, that we're nostalgic for, that we're afraid to let die, and all of our stuff, our accumulated stuff, is a representation of that. It's an outward expression of that. We have to digest. So whatever our stuff represents, memories, good or bad, the person we were, good or bad, we have to process that consciously, metaphysically. We have to comprehend the egos behind the accumulation of our stuff, what we identify and attach ourselves to physically and metaphysically. Because we are made to identify and attach with it. There's something inside of us that is compelling us to do so, deterministically, mechanically, in order to keep us its possession, to continue possessing us. And this is the very real metaphysical science of the things you own end up owning you. The things you can't let go of, it's not because you can't let go of them, it's because there's an ego, a demon, a psychological aggregate that doesn't want to let go of you. You are its possession. Well, that's why we use the word possession when we talk about demons. We are possessed by a demon. That's why we are obsessed with our possessions. The language doesn't lie. The onomatopoeia and the rhyme there is there for a reason. Our obsession with our possessions is a sign, is a window into our possession and what is within us that is obsessed with possessing us. The ego whose obsession is our possession. That's why we are made to have an obsession to hoard possessions. And this is true for everyone. Doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, a billionaire, or you're living in a trailer park somewhere, or you're a student or a child or whatever, and you're collecting and you can't throw anything away. It could be books, it could be toys, it could be trinkets, it could be coins, it could be whatever. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what it is. And I'm not talking necessarily about collecting as a collector or collecting as a hobby. No. I'm talking about like hoarding. I'm like holding on to stuff that it's really is stuff that you just can't let go of. And my friend, God bless him, has a physical medical condition that reveals the truth, the metaphysical, psychological truth of this undigested mass The digestion that we have to undertake consciously, metaphysically, is the digestion, the transformation, the extraction of value from the experiences, the memories related to the stuff that we're hoarding. We extract the value which is self-evident experiential knowledge, that which we seek, the gnosis, the experiential knowledge, the knowledge and the wisdom that is present in those experiences and relate to the self-knowledge, that relate to the knowledge concerning the ego that those experiences were shedding light on. And that ego, that psychological aggregate that holds on to the identification and attachment to the experiences and to the objects related to those experiences. The tokens that become idols, that the ego then makes us obsess over to keep our focus and our attention out there. It's a defense mechanism. It's distraction. It's misdirection. Because if we're obsessed with hoarding and collecting in our house and all of our worldly possessions, all of our physical possessions, we will not be able to pay attention to the fact that we are being possessed from within, that we are, in many ways, just another possession in that house. So the digestion process is essential. We must dig into our obsession with possessions. We must dig into our resistance to letting go of our possessions. We must dig into ourselves, our own psychology, and keep digging and say, why is it? What is it about this stuff? Why am I holding on to it? And we can begin our search by looking at even the animal kingdom. I said earlier about eggs and about the universal intrinsic value of an egg is that it's life-giving. Well, mammals, many mammals, particularly the ones that hibernate for the winter, but also mammals in general, especially the smaller ones. I'm thinking about squirrels and chipmunks and the like, but also larger ones like bears, but also birds like blue jays and others. You look to the animals that hoard, that create dens and nests and fill up those dens and nests with mostly food, but stuff in general. Like it's like blue jays, for example, are notorious for collecting junk, all kinds of junk, shiny things. Blue jays will fill their nests with coins. Like, what is a blue what is a blue jay going to use a coin for? It can't eat it. It doesn't help keep it warm, or does it? I don't know. Does it heat it up with its body heat and then it radiates that body heat? I don't know. But it's shiny. Blue jays love collecting shiny things. Right now, the Toronto Blue Jays are out to collect the World Series shiny trophy, I guess. But chipmunks and squirrels obviously collect nuts. They'll also collect like fluff and like down and feathers and what. So in other words, to make that den more comfy, cozy, insulated, right? And the food they collect or squirrel away, the nuts and seeds and so on. Well, that's obviously their storehouse of nutrition and energy for the winter. So there is a an intrinsic, instinctual, hoarding, nesting behavior, which relates to survival and getting us through hard times, harsh times. The doomsday preppers, for instance, who are building bunkers and have filled those bunkers with 50,000 cans of Campbell's soup and 5 million rounds of ammunition and 5,000 gallons of water and this type of thing, because they're preparing for the worst. And their hoard, their stuff, gives them a feeling of comfort and security. And anytime we're pursuing comfort and security, well, that's a sign of that we're dealing with fear. The instinctive, primal survival instinct. We can start there. You can start, and when you start digging into your resistance to throwing stuff away, giving stuff up and clearing stuff out, and you'll find that there's the resistance to it. If you start digging into it, it's like you don't want to do it because it's like there's a part of you that you're giving up, and that it's like that's a part of you, and I can't give that up. That's a part of who I am. But like that's like chopping off my left arm. Well, then that's a survival instinct. That's right. That's a little bit of death. And fear is the primal survival instinct. Well, but we on the path are on a path of psychological death. So what part of you is connected to the thing that you need to get rid of? Because that fear can apply to different other egos, right? And different aspects. So this is where contemplation and meditation have to come in, and where retrospection meditation can be of truly be priceless in terms of its value. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But first, Benjamin says, your topic today feels especially serendipitous for me. Lately, I've been browsing eBay and came across things I used to own as a kid. Mini arcade games, toys, books, even old keyboards. I ended up buying a few because they stirred such a strong sense of nostalgia and brought back really fond childhood memories. I'm not planning to start a full collection, just picking up a few rare pieces here and there. What you said about the ego using nostalgia as a distraction really resonated with me. Though. I have to admit, there's something undeniably pleasant about revisiting the past. So, what is it about revisiting the past that is undeniably pleasant? Because pleasant memories are, that's self-evident. We want to be able to relive pleasant moments and pleasurable moments in our life. And if we had a great childhood growing up, then there's it's natural to want to be able to experience that, or continue to experience that, or relive that, or have a moment or two, or the ability to recollect and recall. You don't need stuff for that. You can do that just by retrospection meditation. Sometimes, if we have not the greatest memory, then Photos can help, for instance. That's why people keep photo albums. Diaries, that's why people keep diaries and journals. Other keepsakes and memorabilia, that's why we have them and keep them. That, for example, I was describing earlier my grandfather's coin collection, how they weren't actually valuable coins in terms of the market value or the collector's market, but they were valuable to him because they were like a diary of his travels. Everywhere he went, he was sure to make sure that he had a complete set of coins from the country that he visited and the time and place and so on, and that every series of coins from certain countries that were important to him for whatever reason, he would try to collect. And it's one thing to take a moment and relive pleasant memories, but the need to have stuff related to that, or the belief that if only I had that same thing that I used to have that gave me such pleasure as a kid. In my experience, those things no longer have the same impact as they once did. We can say it's undeniably pleasant, to revisit the past. Fair enough. But from my experience, there were items that when I was a child, I was convinced I would never be able to live without. And not only are those items no longer in my life, but when I go back, and some of the items, like we're talking like when I was in junior high and high school, and even into university. For example, I had a poster of the Lord of the Rings, and it was hanging on my wall, and I said, this is always going to be on my wall. It's been rolled up in a box in the garage for at least 25 years. Yeah, because it was on the wall in my bedroom in my parents' old house. But then when they sold that house and built their retirement home, well, then I had to move all my stuff. And when I did that, it didn't go up on the wall here in the new house. I rolled it up and I put it into a box and I put it into storage. I say, one day I'm going to get it plaque mounted and it's going to go back on the wall. But that day never came. And I can go to the garage and I can pull out all that, like that poster and other posters, and I have other plaque mounted things, and I have other like things that were on my wall in university that came off the wall and just went into storage. And now I'm looking at selling this house and I'm looking to move again. And those things that have been in storage for 25 years are probably going to the dump. Things that, 25 years ago, well, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, I swore I would never be without, and that would always be hanging on my wall because they were that important to me. Now, as you know, Lord of the Rings is still very important to me. but not the poster that hangs on the wall. Lord of the Rings is in here and in here and in here. That's where the Lord of the Rings is. And of course, since then there's, it's the movies came out and so on. And I have the collector's edition, extended edition movies on DVD. I'm not throwing those away because I think it's important to keep physical media because even if they say they're going to remake Lord of the Rings, if they remake it, it's going to be garbage compared to the Peter Jackson version. So, but it's just Lord of the Rings is still important to me, but just not that particular item, that object doesn't have the same impact anymore as it once did. It doesn't have the same importance. I have no attachment or identification with it. It doesn't do to me, doesn't have the same effect on me as it once did. And I think you will find that's true for many, 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 many things. There's many, many people on eBay who buy stuff that, and I'm curious, Benjamin, what your experience will be, the things that you bought on eBay. You'll have to, if you report back to me at some point, if you're willing, and let me know if what your experience is. Can we relive our past by getting artifacts, reacquiring artifacts, which once gave us so much pleasure and joy and so many memories in our youth? Because I know many people who collect vintage video games. That's not the right word. Retro video games and retro video game machines. And I didn't buy any, but I downloaded emulators, and I downloaded old ColecoVision cartridges and stuff because I used to have a ColecoVision. And I said, I'm going to be able to relive the glory days when I was 8 years old, right? And 10 years old. And I had a ColecoVision, and I had these games that I played for hours on my ColecoVision. And there I was in university or whatever, downloading emulators on my PC. And I had all these Coleco games, and they were in perfect emulation. I was sitting there playing them, and I'm like, it just wasn't doing it for me anymore. Like I had moved on. And whatever importance that ColecoVision and those games had for me at those times in my life, I had progressed. I had played many, many, many different games since, and on the PC, no less, much more advanced games, much more intricate games, much more compelling games, and far more sophisticated, but more importantly, allegorical and esoteric games. Games like Ultima and others, and games like Diablo. So that, I had moved on, I had evolved, I had advanced. And so me going back and trying to relive the glory days, it just did not have the same impact on me, did not bring back the same feelings of pleasure and enjoyment and that I thought it would. Because I am not the same person I was when I was 8 years old or 10 years old. And so those pleasant memories that I have were appropriate to the person I was at that age. Just like now, I can't go back and play, the 80s Ultima games in emulation or, a DOS emulator and play those old games and expect to have the same experience. So I'm curious, Benjamin, to know what your experience will be. Leia says, I'm getting ready to burn all my journals. Started reading one the other day, and it did not bring me any good memories. More like yikes. Well, That's interesting, Leia. The question is, have you digested those yikes? Have you processed them? Have you digested them? Because if you have, then the yikes will turn into yucks. Not yuck like yuck. No, like yucks. Like laughter. Remember, it was Joan Rivers who famously and brilliantly said, comedy is tragedy plus time. The time gives us distance to disconnect, to disassociate from the tragedy element. And with that distance, we gain objectivity. And with that objectivity, we can see the comedy of it all. And then we can laugh at our past. We could laugh at what, oh my gosh, and I was so silly and I was so, full of myself and I was so self-absorbed and self-important and blah, blah, blah. For me, this whole thing was such a big tragedy. And well, I'm gonna look like I wrote pages and pages and pages about this guy or about this circumstance or about this situation or about this whatever or about my prom dress or about my prom date wore or whatever. And you look at it and you go, oh, like, that was crazy. I can't believe I made such a big deal out of, like, I made such a mountain out of a molehill or whatever, right? So using retrospection meditation, going through your diary, you can use your journals as a means to put you back in that moment, and you can use retrospection meditation to relive, not indulge, but to replay those scenarios, but with the benefit of distance and a little bit of objectivity. You can observe it as a third party observer instead of the first person who's the center of attention, who's having everything happen to them. And if you can gain that objectivity in meditation, and you can see it as a third party observer, you can see the hilarity in it, the comedy of errors. And if you can do that, all of that, it is very likely you may be able to extract some valuable knowledge about yourself, some valuable self-knowledge out of that particular circumstance or scenario or period in your life. That which you call, that makes you go, yikes. Well, you'll just laugh and you'll comprehend, and you will have digested everything and learned everything and gotten so much value out of it. And the pleasure that you now get out of reminiscing about the past, it's not nostalgia for the past. It's the humor. It's the lightness. You've now transmuted it from something heavy and dense and dark. You've transmuted it. You've digested it. You've processed it. And now it's light and it's floating. And now you can, the rest, you can just let it go. You can just pass it through, right? You poop out the rest out the back. And now you're light as a feather. Yeah, you can burn your journal now because you've digested it. Benjamin says, for example, there's a rare Tomy Caveman mini arcade game I used to play when I was a kid. I remember turning off the lights just to watch the LED display glow more vividly. I felt so dramatic and magical back then. I hadn't thought about it in decades, but when I saw it on eBay, I had to buy it. And somehow, the moment I did, I felt like a bit of my childhood energy came rushing back. And he says, I also said I had the same experience with journals. Laugh out loud. Leia says, absolutely. Yes, I can laugh at it all. Well, that's great. Well, that's good. Benjamin, that's fine. I'll be, the moment you bought it, you felt the rush of childhood energy come back. I'd be very interested to know how you feel when it arrives and when you turn it on and turn out the lights and look at the LEDs again and everything else. I'd be very interested to know what your experience will be with it. Um, but yeah, so and Benjamin says that he had the same experience with journals. Um, the practice of retrospection meditation, and we can use the stuff like if we're holding on to stuff, then the stuff that we're holding on to likely still has something of value for us. I'm not suggesting that that value is to be found in nostalgia or in trying to relive the past to indulge and enjoy and yeah, to relive the past in that sense. But retrospection meditation is a way of observing our past and studying our past with that benefit of time and distance and objectivity. You know, there's that old adage, hindsight is 2020. And this is particularly valuable for painful memories and circumstances which generally speaking we prefer to avoid, and we prefer not to dwell on, but at the same time we can't let them go for some reason. So retrospection meditation is particularly valuable to observe ourselves as we were during those times and the pain and suffering that we went through and the causes of that suffering. In other words, what was it inside of us that was reacting to the circumstances around us that was the cause of our suffering, that made us act and react in mechanical ways that ended with less than favorable outcomes? The practice of retrospection meditation, like any or all meditation, we put ourselves in a relaxed meditative state, and then we use our conscious imagination to put ourselves back in that role and play out the circumstance. But we want to do so in a way in that we are not identified and attached. We are not involved and indulgent. We want to view the scenario with as much objectivity as we can muster to remain disattached and unidentified as best we can. There are, Benjamin has a follow-up comment very quickly. He says, when the item arrived, its distinctive shape and colors instantly brought back that unmistakable 80s vibe. As soon as I powered it on and started playing, the muscle memory of moving the character returned, and with it, a flood of childhood memories. It genuinely filled me with a quiet, cheerful warmth. Okay, well, I'm happy for you if that's the case. Okay, where are we now? So, when we are preparing for retrospection meditation, you can go through your pranayama and prepare for your meditation as you normally would. But the further back in childhood we want to go, if you're anything like me, the worse your memory is going to be. But there is a powerful mantra that we can use. And that mantra is best embodied here in the West. It is best embodied in the Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute. There is a scene, Papagino and Papagina, Papagino and Papagina. Okay. It's a duet. Now, can I play this and not be can I play this and not get dinged with a that's a good question. You know what? I think I have to okay, so share screen, entire screen, and share audio. Screen one, share. Okay. I'm going to try to share this, but I might only be able to share like 8 seconds at a time, and then I'll have to pause it, and then I'll have it continue. So if it sounds a little strange, it's just because of me. It's me pausing it and continuing. I'll make this bigger. It's not the greatest resolution, but hopefully I can do this. Function. No, I better put the time on so I can watch. Okay. Can you guys hear that? Could you hear that music? Anyway, so some feedback on whether or not you can hear the music would be good. But this is Papagino and Papagina's duet from Mozart's Magic Flute. And Leia says she could hear it, so that's good. I will... it says auto-generated. Okay, so I think even though the subtitles might be in German or in Spanish, or I don't know what language the subtitles are in, but you will get the pa and the ma. That's the important part. So I just don't know if how familiar you guys are with this opera. So anyway, we'll go. So that, what you heard there, that pa, you can also do the same thing with ma. And this incredibly, these are the mantras for retrospection. You can use these mantras to retrospect all the way to your infancy. If you use them in meditation and with great patience, with no expectations, you can retrospect back to when you were in the crib. In fact, you can retrospect back to when you were in the womb and beyond. You can retrospect to before you came into the world, before you can retrospect into past lives using this mantra. Why this mantra? Because ma is the primal sound that every child makes everywhere around the world. Ma, ma, amma. Everywhere in the world you go, it doesn't matter what culture, what creed, what language they speak. The word for mother is always the same. Ma, mamma, amma. And in some cases it's Anna, Anu, or there's some variations come into play. But what babies in the crib say, and that's what they say to their mother, and what do they say to their father? It's pa, papa, appa, apu. This is the universal truth. It's one of the reasons why, of all the things that separate and divide this degenerated and suffering humanity, one thing that unites it and unites us all are children. Because children are born innocent. And ma is a universal sound of innocence. And ma and pa can take us back all the way to before our karma and our egos integrated into this lifetime, into this vehicle, to our pure and innocent self. And we can return and it's like receding back from this cloud of obstructions and obscurations called this life, and all this stuff, all the accumulated junk in our psychology and all around us, and all of our memories of and conditioning, with the power of pa and ma, with great patience and humility, with no expectations, and emptying our vessel. Remember, I said earlier that getting rid of your stuff is about emptying your vessel so that new things can flow, and so that the fountain from the waters that flow from the fountain of sweet ambrosia deep within ourselves, ma and pa can take us down deep into that well with an empty vessel. So deep, in fact, that we can go beyond this life and deep into the archives of our very being from past lives, but enter into those archives with an empty vessel, innocent, pure, like a child, to have the perception, the consciousness of a child, of an infant. Have you ever seen an infant look at you? They've never seen you before. They've barely ever seen another person before. And they're completely transfixed. They're amazed. It's wondrous. They're completely open and receptive. That's why children learn so incredibly quickly. And they're completely, everything they look at is the most amazing thing they've ever seen in their life. Of course. because they've only been alive a few weeks or a few months. On such a short timeline, everything is amazing. Everything is miraculous. So imagine being able to put yourself back into that place. And Benjamin says, yes, that's true. He says, I've watched a lot of baby videos. And those really are the sounds they make naturally. Absolutely. I'm going to play this again. Hang on a second. Let me just make this an appropriate size. So I'm going to play it again. Again, I'm going to use the pause and start thing. Sorry, I start to cry when I listen to Mozart. I mean, such a beautiful opera to begin with. This is where Papagena meets his love, right? His twin soul. What comes into mind is a scene from Amadeus where Salieri is looking at Mozart's music on the page, and he realizes, he says, this is no composition by a performing monkey. He says, I was staring at the through the cage of those meticulous ink strokes at an absolute beauty. If someone consciously listens to the Magic Flute or any of the great operas by Wagner and Mozart and others, and doesn't hear the voice of God, then they're not listening. So yeah, so ma and pa can return us to that place of innocence, in that before we were spoiled, before we were conditioned, before we were stuffed. And then what might flow? What might flow into our heart minds when we become as a child once more? Pure and innocent and empty, truly empty. What wonders, what miracles might flow into us. And what wisdom, what guidance, what knowledge that we might then pour forth into the world and into all of the empty cups and all those who thirst for knowledge, for truth, for light, for guidance. But let's be honest, right? We're stuffed and we're surrounded by stuff. We're inundated with it. We're saturated by it. And at every turn, we're being assaulted with more and more and more stuff. And not just physically, not just as consumers being told to stuff our homes with more junk and more gadgets and more upgrades and more, whatever. No, I mean psychologically. Our attention spans. And now AI and AI content. No, it's AI slop. In the last week, I have been confronted by more AI generated YouTube videos that I care to count. And I can tell you not one has come close to drawing a tear from my eye and making me well up in the same way that 41 seconds of Mozart's Magic Flute is capable of doing. A fuzzy, low resolution version of the Magic Flute. No amount of AI slop. Nothing. No content of any kind produced by or through or via or from anything mechanical, the big machine, Hollywood, whatever. And the inundation, the nonstop slop machine that's flooding the world with soylent green. Nothing can come close to what 40 seconds of the Magic Flute can do to our heart, to our mind. And if we repeat it, if we sing it in meditation, and we are shown the way, Mozart taught us how. Commit this, it's a 30-second clip from 9 seconds to 41 seconds. So it's a 30-second duration. Commit this to memory. Now, what I do is, it's a duet, right? So the way Mozart wrote it, it's all papas, right? It's pa pa pa, and Papagena repeats pa pa pa. So everything that Papageno sings, Papagena repeats. She mirrors back to him himself, because he's Papageno and she's Papagena, because they're two parrots, right? So parrots are pa. They're parrots, right? It's Papageno, that's his name, and she's Papagena, and so she's mirroring him, and so everything that he sings, she echoes back to him, and that's fine, and that's perfect in the context of the opera. But in the context of retrospection meditation, pa is masculine, absolutely, the divine masculine, but ma is feminine, the divine feminine. So what I do to perform this practice in retrospection is I replace Papagena's parts as though her character's name was Mamagena. So it's Papageno and Mamagena. So every time Papageno sings pa, she responds ma. And he goes pa. She goes ma, pa, right? So it's like that. And that's why you can balance the masculine and feminine and get both. Or you can sing it in your you don't have to sing it out loud, by the way. You can do it mentally in meditation, right? Because it's the purpose here is for us to travel back, not physically or not even out of our body or whatever, but but internally. And so the importance here is to to retrograde, right? To retrospect. And so it's an internal, it's a mental, it's a conscious, emotional traveling that we are taking within ourselves. So all of this happens in our own mind, and we don't have to do this out loud, because that's just a distraction. And the physicality of it all, and especially if you try to, we're not opera singers, we don't have this, we don't have the capacity to pull this off and remain in meditation, I don't think so. But you do that mentally and just relax, and you can just repeat it on a loop, or just play around with it. There's no particular reason why we have to stick to how Mozart presented it. It's just, I have found that as a good starting point. And but you can also elongate, right? The thing is that it's the rhythm and the shortness of it, and keeping it in that innocent, childlike perspective. So you can play with it. You don't have to formalize it. You don't have to worry about, am I doing it right, or am I doing it wrong, or, oh, I can't remember how it goes. Don't worry. How would a baby do it? Ma, 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 ma. You know, like, be natural. Let it just work through you. Let the mantra do the work, and just relax and just allow, right? And just be open and wondrous, right? And let go, and truly let go of all concerns and all expectations. Retrospection is truly about emptying your cup to be able to see as a child sees, as an infant sees, with that pure consciousness. What insights, what miracles, what revelations might flow into such an empty vessel, cleansed, made innocent, made pure, and made completely empty. So if you combine this with the stuff that you've collected and the psychological correspondence related to that accumulated stuff, that's that psychological aggregate that is holding on to you in the same way that you're holding on to that stuff, what insights about that psychological aggregate related to that stuff from your past that affects your present? Because what might flow in terms of comprehension, knowledge, wisdom, analysis, answers that snap you out of the hypnosis and possession and obsession with possession. Because in that comprehension, your divine mother, your divine ma, can then come and eradicate that ego. Because your divine innermost, your pa, has learned what he needed to learn. And that's exactly what this scene is about, because Papageno is incomplete, and he is unwise, he is foolish and foolhardy, and he is lonely, and he is lustful, he's all these things. Why? Because he hasn't found his Papagena. The power of the divine feminine to deliver all that we need on the path. But we must empty ourselves. We must make ourselves like a child, so that our divine mother can feed us the nourishment that we need. If we are stuffed little spoiled rotten babies, so full of stuff, and we're stuffed. We can't receive anything. The nourishment that we truly need, there's no place for it. There's no place to put it. All of this is related and connected. Benjamin says, I've been thinking about the overwhelming flood of AI-generated content online, and it occurred to me that one way to counter it is to start creating something purely human, like music. I've decided to learn how to compose, hoping it will help me stay focused and grounded amid this AI deluge. Well, congratulations. I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea. I wish I was more musical and could do the same, but no, but I've resolved to compose in a different way, in a different medium. But I've shared with you guys the Atlas Conscious Arts, and I think I've shared with you. I've already put together the website. Bespoke creative consulting and solutions beyond the state of the art. Right? Put magic and meaning into your media and marketing. I don't have the musical chops to be a composer, but I have the language and the storytelling to be a writer. But more importantly, and I think I trust that you would all agree with this, I have the internal guidance, the internal compass, and the sight, and the will to direct and to be a director of artists and creatives and show them the way and help inspire them and give them the insights that will take them in new, meaningful, and truly magical directions with their creations, to produce conscious arts, to help others do as Benjamin intuitively wanted to do, to be a composer and to fight the AI deluge with something human and meaningful and magical and purposeful and beautiful. And my goal will be to reach out to companies, and whether they're creative companies, studios, or just production companies, or animation companies, or video game companies, or just companies in general, having products and services that, but to combat, right, the soylent green of AI. For the sake of what we call purposeful profits. And bring forth and awaken a conscious state of the art from within. So not so much composing, more conducting, but not music necessarily. because I just don't have that particular talent. But with language, with sound, with words and meanings and images and the storytelling and the confidence to be able to communicate that to musicians and put my faith and trust in their creative process. Because that's what a good director does. And that's what a conductor does. Conductor listens, he hears the big picture. And he orchestrates. That's what a director does. In the theater or in film or in manufacturing and in many other areas, a director just gets everyone on the same page and everyone woven with the same through line. But you're right, Benjamin. We have to do something to counteract the deluge of AI slop. And that something has to be human and it has to be inspired. It has to embody the human spirit. That divine truth that John Keats so famously said, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you can know in life and all you need to know. So there's great potential in decluttering our lives and decluttering our hearts and our minds. But decluttering is a misnomer. We must digest. We must process. And only then can we truly let go of all the stuff, which once we comprehend what it really is, then we can finally get rid of this shit. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I want to thank you for spending the time today, as always. And I hope this has been useful and timely and serendipitous for you. And Benjamin, he says it has. And Leia also mentioned that she's on the verge of burning journals and whatnot. As I said, this has been all week. This topic has just been, hammering me in different ways. I think I mentioned earlier, I spent like a good chunk of yesterday putting antique furniture, antique dining room set, living room set, bedroom set on Facebook Marketplace. And it was just, and then, so I've just been dealing with stuff all week. And my friend who's dealing with stuff and dealing with like stuff causing a medical problem, accumulation of stuff, undigested stuff. And then this morning, the minor flood and soaking a whole bunch of stuff. It's just been a lot of stuff. And I remind you, just for fun, to go look up George Carlin stuff on YouTube. And then it's the Magic Flute with Mozart, Papageno and Papagena, and to substitute mama and equal parts mama and papa. When you do that is in your retrospection meditation, it'll help you to remember. And remember in a way that, so return to that childhood innocence and that emptiness. To be able to see with that same clarity, with that same consciousness again. And all of this you will find helpful and beneficial in being able to digest and process that which you are carrying, all the stuff in your heart mind from your past, which may or may not be expressing itself in your attic, in your basement, in your garage, in a storage locker somewhere, or a storage unit somewhere. So there you have it. Benjamin says, thank you for today's live stream. He says, thank you for today's serendipitous live stream. It reminded me how important it is to unlearn so much of our conditioning in order to become more open to hearing and responding to the divine voice within. I truly appreciate your insights, and I hope all continues to be well with you. Thank you, Benjamin. I appreciate you as always. I appreciate you being here and your contributions to our live streams. Anybody have any more comments or questions? If not, have a wonderful week. If you're in the US, I guess this must be Thanksgiving weekend. No, that's in November for you. Okay. So, but coming up is Halloween, All Hallows Eve. Now, you may have thought or expected I might be doing something related to Halloween, but of course, the stuff happens, right? So, but maybe next Sunday, maybe we will do a pod or a live stream about Halloween. We'll see what happens and what unfolds during the week. But in the meantime, have an excellent week. Take care of yourself. Be well. And until then, as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone.